Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're diving into something I know a lot of you are really into: web UI design. I mean, who isn't fascinated by the way websites and apps look and feel these days?
Absolutely. It's a topic that's both visually engaging and surprisingly deep. There's a lot more to it than just making things look pretty.
Exactly. And you actually sent over a PhD thesis on the topic. Now, that's dedication. It's pretty dense. But I have to say, there's some seriously cool insights in here. Like, I had no idea how much real-world design thinking goes into creating a great digital experience.
It's fascinating how this thesis connects UI trends back to design principles from the physical world. We're talking architecture, industrial design, even ergonomics.
Right. Like, I was blown away by the comparison between website layouts and architectural space planning.
Yeah, it makes you think about those early websites. Remember how clunky and chaotic some of them were?
Oh, totally. Like trying to navigate a maze blindfolded?
Exactly. And this thesis argues that just like a well-designed building guides you intuitively, a website needs that clear structure and hierarchy so you don't get lost clicking around.
So it's not just about decorating, it's about designing an experience, right?
Exactly. And to really understand how we got to where we are today, the thesis takes us on a fascinating historical journey. We start with the early days of the web and what's called skeuomorphism. Remember when digital interfaces tried to mimic real-world objects, like your Notes app looking like a physical notepad?
Oh, yeah. I totally remember that. I kind of miss it in a way. It felt comforting, like you weren't really using a computer.
Well, that was the idea. Skeuomorphism helped bridge the gap for users who were new to computers. But as we all got more comfortable with digital interfaces, that need for real-world metaphors faded away. Plus, technology was getting faster, screens sharper. The clunky visuals of skeuomorphism just couldn't keep up.
So enter minimalism, right? Clean lines, lots of white space, simple icons. It's like a breath of fresh air for our eyes.
You got it. But here's where the thesis gets really interesting. It argues that this shift towards minimalism wasn't just a passing trend. It was deeply rooted in those influential design movements like Bauhaus. And then you have designers like Dieter Rams.
Wait, hold on. Dieter Rams, the Braun designer. The less but better guy.
That's the one. And that philosophy, stripping away the unnecessary, focusing on functionality and clarity, really took off online. I mean, it was a perfect match for the need for speed and efficiency on the web.
Makes total sense. Think about how much we rely on the web now, constantly checking emails, scrolling through social media. Nobody has time for slow-loading pages or confusing menus.
Exactly. And that need for speed and efficiency fueled the rise of flat design, which took minimalism even further.
Right, like going from a chunky physical book to a sleek digital tablet. It's all about that minimalist aesthetic.
But, as the thesis points out, even flat design had its downside.
Oh, I thought flat design was like the ultimate good UI.
Well, it solved some problems, but created others. Those super flat interfaces sometimes lacked the visual cues that tell us what's interactive. Users were left wondering, can I click this? Is this a button or just a shape?
So flat design was almost too flat.
Exactly. And that led to what some designers call flat design 2.0, bringing back subtle shadows and gradients.
It's like finding that Goldilocks zone, not too much, not too little, just the right amount of visual depth to guide the user.
Right. And one of the most influential examples of this, and the thesis goes deep on this, is Google's material design. It's a design language that revolutionized how we think about interfaces.
Okay, material design. It's everywhere, but I've never fully grasped what it's all about. The thesis calls it brilliant, so break it down for me.
The brilliance of material design is that it treats the UI like a physical object, a sheet of paper. You can almost imagine this digital paper being layered, folded, moved around, just like the real thing.
So it's like bringing a bit of that tactile real-world experience back to the digital, but in a super sophisticated way.
Exactly. It taps into our understanding of how physical objects behave. The use of shadows, for example, is key in material design.
Because shadows tell us about depth and how objects relate to each other in the real world.
Precisely. A raised button casts a shadow, giving you that visual cue that it's clickable. It's about using those real-world principles to create a visual language that feels intuitive. Even if you've never used a material design interface before, it just makes sense.
That's fascinating. So it's not just about making things look pretty, it's about making them make sense to our brains.
And speaking of making sense, the thesis also talks about the evolution of material design with Material U.
Material you, yes. It's all about personalization, right? Like your phone theme changing based on your wallpaper.
Exactly. It lets the interface adapt its color scheme to your preferences.
Okay, but is that really a trend? It seems like a Google thing.
That's where the thesis makes a good point. It argues that material actually points to a much broader trend, this growing desire for interfaces that are more personal. It's like the digital world is finally catching up at the fact that we're all unique.
I like that. It's like our devices are finally getting to know us. So it's not just about designing an interface, it's about designing an interface for you.
Exactly. And that shift towards personalized experience is only going to accelerate in the coming years.
I'm here for it. Speaking of user preferences, one trend that's exploded is dark mode. I feel like every app has it now. Is it more than just an aesthetic thing?
You're right to question that. Dark mode has definite benefits. The thesis even connects it back to those ergonomic principles we talked about. It can reduce eye strain, especially in low light, which a lot of people find more comfortable, especially in the evenings.
Okay, so there are real practical reasons behind it, but it does just look cool too.
It does. But it's not as simple as just making everything dark.
Oh, I've definitely seen some websites that do dark mode poorly. It's like they forgot about contrast.
Exactly. The thesis emphasizes how crucial it is to design dark mode thoughtfully. You have to consider color contrast, how different people perceive light and dark, and make sure it's accessible for everyone. It's a good example of how a seemingly simple trend actually involves a lot of design thinking.
So it's a reminder that good design isn't about blindly following trends. It's about understanding the why and implementing them in a way that benefits everyone.
Absolutely. And speaking of trends, there are a couple that the thesis labels as experimental neumorphism and glassmorphism. Both tried to bring back a bit of realism and depth to UI design while still keeping that modern minimalist aesthetic.
Neumorphism. That's the one where everything looks soft and pillowy, right?
Yes. It uses subtle shadows and highlights to make elements appear raised or recessed, almost like you could touch them.
I get the appeal, but the thesis mentions some accessibility concerns.
Right. Because neumorphism relies on subtle visual cues, it can be difficult for people with visual impairments. It was popular for a bit, but it never really became mainstream because of those accessibility barriers.
Another reminder that inclusivity is key.
Exactly. And then there's glassmorphism. You might have seen it popping up here and there. It's all about that frosted glass aesthetic.
Oh, yeah. It looks really sleek. Apple uses it in their macOS and iOS interfaces, right?
They do. It creates depth and visual hierarchy by layering those semi-transparent elements, like you're looking through frosted glass. But like any trend, it has to be used carefully. Too much transparency can impact readability and performance.
So it's like adding a touch of visual flair without compromising usability.
Exactly. Now, are you ready to move on to a trend that's all about grabbing your attention?
Oh, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Let's talk about the rise of bold typography and content-focused design.
Content-focused design. I like the sound of that already. Is this why I'm seeing so many websites with huge e-headlines these days?
You're exactly right. It's a trend driven by, I think, our need for clarity, impact, in a world that's just overflowing with content. You know, big eye-catching typography helps websites cut through all the noise, get their message across quickly.
It's like the website is shouting its main point from the rooftops, you know?
Uh-huh. In a way, yeah. And it's actually surprisingly effective. Think about landing pages or news articles. Using bold typography creates that visual hierarchy, guides your eye to the important stuff. Plus, I think font choices can add so much personality. It's like choosing the right outfit for a website.
I love that analogy, but wouldn't too much bold text be a bit overwhelming, like constantly being shouted at visually?
Yeah, that's the key. It's about strategic boldness. The thesis emphasizes, using it to highlight key elements, creating a visual flow that's both engaging and easy to follow.
So it's not just about size, it's about using bold text in a way that makes sense.
Exactly. Now, shifting gears a bit, let's talk about a trend that adds a layer of delight, I think. Micro-interactions and motion UI. Have you noticed those more and more?
Oh, yeah. I'm really intrigued by this. I've noticed it more and more. Those little animations that happen when you click a button or scroll.
Yeah.
It just adds a level of polish.
It does. And it goes beyond just aesthetics. These subtle animations, they're called micro-interactions, they actually enhance usability.
So it's like the interface is acknowledging your actions, saying, hey, I got that.
Exactly. Think about the ripple effects when you tap a button, or how a menu icon transforms into a close icon. These are micro-interactions. They give you that instant confirmation. you're click registered.
I never really thought about it that way, but it makes sense. It's like the interface is having this little conversation with you.
And beyond just feedback, micro interactions can guide your attention. They highlight changes. They can even tell a little story.
Like a progress bar that fills up smoothly to show a download, or a loading screen with a fun animation while you wait.
Exactly. It's about adding a layer of interactivity, I think. Dynamism, making it feel more responsive, alive even.
It's like that perfect touch of magic, just enough to make you smile.
You got it. Now, ready to dive into a trend that lets websites really express their personality.
Oh, absolutely. I love when websites have a strong visual identity.
Custom illustrations and visual storytelling. It's about moving beyond, those generic stock photos.
I have noticed this trend more and more. Some websites use illustrations to, walk you through a process or explain a concept. It's really engaging.
Right. Illustrations can be incredibly effective. They humanize a digital product. For example, imagine a financial app using, friendly characters to make budgeting less intimidating, or a travel website using illustrations to transport you to, exotic destinations.
It's like the illustrations are injecting a bit of warmth, personality. It makes the whole experience more inviting, memorable.
It goes back to, I think, the power of visual communication. We're drawn to images, stories. Websites can tap into that, create a more meaningful connection.
So it's not just about aesthetics, it's about using visuals strategically. Enhance understanding, build trust, even make you feel something.
Exactly. But with any trend, there's a need for balance. The thesis warns against just using illustrations for decoration. They should be well integrated, complement the content, enhance the experience, without being distracting.
It's like finding that sweet spot, visual richness, but also performance.
Exactly. Now let's talk about a trend that's less about visual flair, more about practicality. Remember we talked about how we all use so many different devices these days?
Oh, yeah. Phones, tablets, laptops, even TVs sometimes.
Exactly. And that brings us to, I think, a foundation of modern web UI design. Responsive and adaptive layouts. This is about making sure a website looks and functions great on any device, from a tiny phone to a giant monitor.
It's like the interface is smart enough to know what device you're using.
That's a great way to put it. The thesis actually breaks down two main approaches: responsive design and adaptive design. Both are essential these days.
So it's not just about shrinking or enlarging elements, it's about tailoring the entire experience.
You got it. Think about a news website. On a desktop, you might have a multi-column layout. But on a phone, that same content might be arranged in a single column for readability. Adaptive design can even change the features available.
So if I'm on my phone, the interface might hide some less essential features.
Precisely. And the thesis highlights this trend of mobile-first design, where the focus is on mobile users, since that's how so many people access the web.
Makes sense. But isn't all this adaptability really complex to implement?
It can be. But modern UI frameworks and design systems have made it a lot easier. And the thesis argues that this is just the beginning. We're moving towards context-aware layouts.
Okay, context-aware layouts. That sounds pretty futuristic. What does that even mean?
It means the interface adapts to more than just screen size. Factors like your location, time of day, even your past behavior on the website.
Whoa, that's next-level personalization. So the future is all about flexibility and adaptability, huh?
You nailed it. And speaking of real-world examples, I think you'll find it fascinating to see how these trends have been applied by some of the biggest names out there. The thesis covers some really compelling case studies. Shall we dive into those?
Absolutely. I'm ready to see these trends in action.
Okay, let's start with the big one. Google's material design system.
Okay, yeah. Material design, I feel like everyone's heard of it, but I'm ready to go deeper than just the surface.
Excellent. Back in 2014, Google was facing a bit of a design challenge, I guess you could say. Their products, Gmail, Android, they all looked and felt different. No consistent design.
So they needed to unify their design across all those different products.
Exactly. And that's where material design comes in. It aimed to do just that. It brought together a lot of the trends we've been discussing. Flat but layered aesthetic. Bold colors. Consistent motion. And of course, a huge emphasis on adaptive layouts.
So it was like minimalism, but practical.
You got it. Interfaces became cleaner. Less cluttered. But they kept those important visual cues. Buttons had shadows. Panels had hierarchy. Transitions were animated, almost like guiding you through the interface.
I love that. The interface as a dance partner.
And one of the most recognizable examples of this is the floating action button, or FAB. That circular button you see in so many apps. Always prominent, always signifies the primary action.
Ah, so simple. It's like material design took all those complex design principles and made them intuitive.
And that's why it was such a hit with users. They love the consistency, the intuitiveness. It worked seamlessly across devices.
But what about the impact on Google itself? Was it just about happy users, or was there a business benefit?
Oh, the impact was huge. Google's own data showed a big jump in engagement with their redesigned apps. For example, the Google Drive revamp. It didn't just look more modern, it performed better, partly due to those simpler graphics.
So better user experience, A&D, better performance.
Exactly. And from a branding perspective, material design finally gave Google a unique visual identity, which they didn't have before.
It's like they found their design voice and it resonated with everyone.
And it went even further. Many third-party apps started adopting material design principles. It became a sort of gold standard for interface design.
Wow, so Google basically revolutionized UI design with material design.
It's a great case study in how a well-thought-out design system can have a ripple effect, across the entire digital world.
Okay, I'm sold on material design. What other case studies does the thesis highlight?
Let's shift gears a bit. Look at an example that's less about visual flair, more about user-centered design. gov.uk, the United Kingdom's government website.
Really? A government website? Those aren't usually known for good design.
I know, right? That's what makes it so interesting. gov.uk launched in 2012, and it totally changed how we think about what a government website could be. It even won a Design of the Year award, beating out fashion and architecture.
That's incredible. So what did they do?
They embraced minimalism, usability, and accessibility. They might not sound flashy, but they're so important.
So they focused on function over form.
Exactly. Picture a website that's incredibly simple. Black text on white, limited colors, crystal clear typography, and a layout that's so logical it's almost like a library.
Sounds pretty austere, but I can see how it would make it easy to find stuff.
That was the whole point. They stripped away all the unnecessary clutter, images, decorative elements, everything. That meant faster loading times, and the focus was just on the content.
It makes sense. People go to government websites to get things done, not to be wowed by visuals.
Exactly. And gov.uk made getting things done effortless. They replaced long blocks of text with interactive tools, calculators, step-by-step wizards.
So they really thought about the user and how to make things easy.
Yeah, it's user-centered design at its best, and it worked. Users love the simplicity. They could actually find what they needed, complete tasks online without a headache, which I'm sure made the government happy too. Fewer calls to helplines. Everyone wins.
So it's proof that less is often more when it comes to good design.
Absolutely. And it shows that minimalism, when done well, can benefit both the user and the organization.
Okay, two very different case studies, both incredibly successful. What's next?
Let's look at a company that's really mastered responsive and adaptive design. Airbnb. They've made navigating their platform super smooth no matter what device you're using.
I use Airbnb all the time. I'm curious to hear how they do it.
Like a lot of companies, Airbnb initially had separate designs for desktop, mobile web, and their app. This resulted in a lot of inconsistencies.
I've definitely experienced that jarring feeling when you switch from one device to another.
Right. So Airbnb decided to fix this. They invested in creating a unified design language. They call it their design language system, or DLS, and at the core of this system was a commitment to responsive and adaptive design.
So a good vision.
But
how did they actually do it?
they adopted a really clever layout system. They use cards to display properties. On a large screen, the cards can arrange themselves in a grid. On a smaller screen, they stack neatly.
That card-based layout is everywhere these days. It just works.
Exactly. They borrowed a successful pattern and I think made it their own. But they didn't stop there. They also really embraced imagery and illustrations as part of their visual refresh.
Because, well, choosing a place to stay is a very visual experience. You want to see those photos, get a feel for the place.
Precisely. Airbnb got that.
Yeah.
They made sure every listing had great photos, and they added illustrations, little micro interactions. Like, imagine a little animation when you save a listing to your wish list.
It's all about those little details that make it more fun.
And Airbnb's typography is great. They chose bold, readable fonts, which fits with that content-focused trend we were talking about.
So it's not just about adapting the layout, it's about adapting the content too.
You got it. On mobile, they might hide some secondary information to avoid overwhelming the small screen. But on desktop, that same information is displayed up front. They're making decisions about what's most important to you, depending on the device.
It's like the website is reading my mind.
Haha, that's the goal.
Mm.
And while Airbnb doesn't share all their data, it's safe to say that their responsive approach has been a big part of their success.
Okay, this is making a lot of sense. It's about using design trends strategically to create a good user experience.
You're getting it. Now, are you ready for our final case study? This one's all about personalization and how AI is changing things.
Oh, bring it on. I love this stuff.
We're talking about Netflix?
Netflix. I love Netflix. They're so good at recommendations. Tell me their secrets.
Well, everyone knows about their recommendation engine. But what's really fascinating is how they personalize the entire UI, even the visuals. It's AI-driven design, in action.
My mind is blown. How does that even work?
So on the surface, Netflix seems pretty standard. You have your grid of movie thumbnails, right? Categorized by genre, recommendations.
It's the classic Netflix layout.
But here's the thing. Netflix uses AI to decide which titles you see, and even which thumbnail image is displayed. It's all based on what you've watched, your ratings, even the time of day.
Wait. So I might see a different thumbnail for a movie than someone else?
Exactly. For example, let's say you love romantic comedies. You might see a thumbnail that emphasizes the romance. But your friend, who's more into action, might see a different thumbnail, one that highlights, like a car chase.
So it's like Netflix is showing me exactly what I want to see.
It's incredibly smart. It's all algorithms, dynamic content. The interface adapts to you.
It's not one size fits all. It's like tailor-made.
And they don't stop there. They also use animations in motion in their UI, like hover over a title. It might start playing a preview.
Yeah.
Or those smooth transitions when you scroll.
Oh, yeah, those are nice. They make it feel so dynamic.
Exactly. It's using motion to enhance engagement, tell a story. And it's another area where they've been smart. Over time, they've simplified their navigation, moved away from complex menus. Now it's all about scrolling, which is much more natural, for browsing.
It's all about removing friction, making it effortless.
And it works. Netflix has hinted that their personalized approach has led to more engagement and more watch time.
Well, they've definitely mastered the art of keeping me glued to the screen. It's AI and design working together.
This case study really shows the power of creating interfaces that learn and adapt.
It's like having an interface that's made just for you.
And that's where UI design is going. Buckle up. It's going to be an exciting ride.
Wow, I feel like my brain is full. We've gone from the history of UI design to the future. It's crazy how much goes into making the stuff we use every day.
I know, right? It's a field that never stands still, always pushing boundaries.
Okay, let's try to sum this all up. What are the big takeaways for listeners?
I think the most important thing is UI design is about the user. It's not about following every trend or trying to be fancy. It's about understanding what makes these easy to use, intuitive, even delightful.
So designing for people, not screens.
Yeah, exactly. And as we've seen, that often means looking at the real world for inspiration. Those basic design principles you find in architecture, industrial design, ergonomics.
I never would have thought that the design of a building could, inform a website, but it totally makes sense now.
It's about creating experiences that feel natural, whether you're navigating a building or a website.
And as technology keeps advancing, we're going to see so much more. I mean, AI, immersive experiences, voice control, it's mind-blowing.
It is. But no matter how advanced things get, the human element is key. We need interfaces that aren't just functional, but also intelligent, empathetic even.
So interfaces that understand our needs, our preferences, even how we're feeling.
Exactly. It's about making tech an extension of ourselves, like a helpful companion.
Okay, you mentioned the thesis had some final thoughts on, what makes UI design effective?
Oh, yeah. So as we've discussed, it's about that balance between how things look, how they work, and the human experience. It's like all those things have to work together.
Like a three-legged stool. If one leg is shorter, the whole thing falls over.
Uh-huh. I like that. And the thesis argues that, at the end of the day, the best UIs are those that just work effortlessly, intuitively.
So it's not about being trendy, it's about being user-centered.
Exactly. And that means really understanding your users, doing research, testing your designs, getting feedback. It's a constant process.
Makes sense. UI design is always changing. Designers need to be adaptable.
Absolutely. That's what makes it so challenging and so rewarding, It's a field that makes us think creatively and use tech for good.
Wow, this has been amazing. Thank you for taking me through all of this. I feel like I have a much better grasp on UI design now.
It's been my pleasure. And to everyone listening, thanks for joining us. Keep learning, keep exploring, and let's use technology to make the world a better place.
That's a great note to end on. Until next time, keep diving deep, everyone.